Welcome to Stories Room. Enjoy listening and don't forget to subscribe. Jacob was sitting in the dimly lit living room, waiting. The clock on the wall had just struck midnight, and at the same moment, a heavy thud seemed to echo in his heart. The room was almost completely silent. Only the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft creaking of old wooden furniture broke the stillness. On the coffee table in front of him stood a glass of red wine, untouched. He was waiting for Alicia. She came home around 1 a.m. The sharp sound of her high heels echoed on the hallway tiles. Then the rustle of her bag could be heard as she tossed it onto the console in the foyer. Only one lamp was lit in the living room, casting a faint, warm glow. Alicia saw her husband's silhouette in the armchair and froze for a second. "You're late again?" Jacob asked quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes," she sighed, removing her scarf. "A client's project turned out to be complicated, and I had to stay and finish the drafts." Jacob pressed his lips together. Alicia was an interior designer, of course. Sometimes she really did have to work late. But lately, these late nights had been happening far too often. He noticed how she tried to avoid his gaze, and a cold, heavy feeling rolled through him. "Working with the client?" he asked, fixing his eyes on her. "Yes," she repeated tersely. "Everything's fine. Why aren't you asleep?" "Because I want to understand what's going on," he replied, looking straight at her. "Lately, I've noticed you come home not just tired, but distant. You're always on your phone, you get messages at all hours, and now your phone is locked with a code I don't know." Alicia frowned, hanging her coat on a hanger, then gave him a weary look. "I'm entitled to my own personal space, Jacob. There's no need to blow this out of proportion." He held her gaze, then said, "If it were that simple. Listen, I want to hear the truth. Is there someone else?" For a split second, Alicia's face twitched. She looked either surprised or angry. But she forced a strained smile. "God, are you jealous?" "Stop imagining things. I'm just tired. I need a shower and bed." Without waiting for him to answer, she walked past him and disappeared into the bathroom. Jacob remained in the armchair, the wine still untouched. A sense of anxiety and suspicion clung to him. He knew Alicia well enough to see that something in her had changed. She no longer talked openly, her kisses had become perfunctory. Deep down, he still hoped he was wrong. But the next day, when he dropped by her workplace, supposedly by chance, to invite her to lunch, she wasn't there. The office was empty, and coworkers said Alicia had gone to a site. Something in their tone worried him. He decided to check if she was really meeting with a client or if the site was just a cover. As the days went by, tension filled the house. Alicia would sometimes return at 11 at night, sometimes at midnight, and a single word seemed to hang unspoken in the air between them: betrayal. Jacob knew it couldn't go on like this, and he decided to go all in. One night he sat in his car outside a prestigious downtown hotel. He had tracked Alicia there several times in recent weeks. A clue from an email on her laptop had confirmed his suspicions. This hotel was central to whatever was going on. He waited nearly an hour in the car. Outside, rain poured down, and the doorman hovered by the revolving doors with an umbrella. Finally, the glass doors swung open, and Alicia appeared in the company of 2 other people. Jacob recognized one of them immediately. It was his half-brother, Daniel. Jacob felt a chill deep inside. Alicia and Daniel were walking together, laughing at something. They looked relaxed and at ease, as if nothing connected them to the outside world. Daniel leaned toward her, whispered something, and she touched his arm, smiling. Jacob raised his phone's camera with shaking hands and took several photos. His heart pounded as he tried to steady himself. The next morning, when Alicia returned around dawn, he was already waiting for her in the living room. On the table lay a folder of photographs. Wordlessly, he slid the folder toward her. "Take a look." Alicia's face went pale when she saw the pictures. Several photos clearly showed her and Daniel, in the hotel lobby, at a restaurant table, even holding hands in the parking lot. "Can you explain?" Jacob's voice was quiet, almost calm, but inside he was boiling. She froze, then exhaled. "It's not what you think." "Really?" he said, voice full of sarcasm. "Then tell me, what is it?" He came to me for help. He's starting a new firm and needed design solutions for the offices." "Help? At midnight? At a hotel?" Jacob's voice trembled with anger. Do you think I'm an idiot? Alicia was silent. She realized there was no way to avoid the truth now. Daniel, he told me he had problems with his wife, that he was alone, she whispered. I just wanted to support him. Yes, we had dinner a couple of times. Maybe I went too far. But it's not what you're thinking. Jacob ran a hand over his face, trying to keep composure. Let's go straight to the point. Are you two seeing each other? Alicia lowered her head. Yes, she admitted almost inaudibly. But I never meant for. Enough. He slashed the air with his hand. I've heard enough. What the hell, Alicia? That's my brother. Mine. How could you? She rushed to him, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, I beg you. This was a mistake, a stupid mistake, and I regret it. He recoiled. Mistake? You're calling months of lying a mistake? You've lied to my face every night. I got confused, she choked out. You were always at work. I felt so alone. And Daniel knew how to listen. Hearing his brother's name, Jacob turned away to the window in disgust. A few minutes of heavy silence passed. Finally, he said, I'm leaving. I need time to figure out what to do. She rushed to him, trying to hug him. Please don't abandon me. We can fix this. After something like this, he said bitterly. I don't know if that's even possible. But I just can't be near you right now. He shook off her grasp and went upstairs to pack. Half an hour later, he was already driving toward a nearby hotel. Thus began a new phase of his life. The following days were chaotic. Alicia called him endlessly, sending messages that were at times angry, at times pleading. Daniel also called a couple of times, but Jacob refused to answer. He just couldn't speak to his traitorous brother yet. Before long, it was time to handle the practicalities, division of property, paperwork, the divorce. The hardest moment came when their 14-year-old daughter Emily learned part of the truth. All she knew was that her parents were divorcing because her mother had been dishonest. Emily cried and yelled, believing her father was leaving the family over a stupid fight. She had no idea it was something far worse. Jacob had discovered that Emily might not even be his daughter. He'd harbored doubts for some time, dates that didn't match, ambiguous hints. It was confirmed when, caught in the swirl of the whole affair, he took a DNA test. The result arrived in his email. Probability of paternity, 0%. It crushed him completely. A few months later, he vanished entirely from Alicia's and Emily's lives, changed his number, sold the house, withdrew his share of the business, in which Daniel was also involved, and reinvested it in a new project. To everyone, it was as if he'd disappeared. Deep down, he was torn between guilt toward Emily. She was just a child caught in the crossfire, and the overwhelming pain inflicted by the people closest to him. In a small coastal town, he began his life anew. He rented a modest apartment and worked as a consultant at an IT company. His co-workers were wary at first, but he quickly proved his expertise, and within a few years he became the department head. The town was quiet, which helped him forget his old wounds. Still, the emptiness inside him remained. Meanwhile, Alicia was sinking under the weight of her problems. Jacob's departure affected her more severely than she'd imagined. Neighbors and acquaintances whispered judgmentally about her affair. Daniel, found to be involved in major business scams, was unable to help her. Their relationship had collapsed under mutual accusations and the general catastrophe. Alicia's dreams of a new, happy life crumbled, as did her reputation and financial well-being. Emily spent a long time blaming her father for just running away. Only as she grew older did she begin to suspect that something more had happened than a mere family quarrel. Alicia fell into a deep depression, barely holding on to a low-paying job. Increasingly, she needed medical care, but without insurance or money, she was at a dead end. Years passed. Jacob managed to found his own software company. It grew rapidly, from consulting work to an entire IT conglomerate, valued by clients for its innovation and reliability. Now he lived in a modern penthouse overlooking a vast metropolis. One weekday, the doors to his office suddenly flew open. His assistant jumped up in alarm, trying to stop the intruder, but she had already entered. It was Emily. She stood there, hands clenched, fury in her eyes. "Hello," he said huskily, seeing the daughter he hadn't seen in many years. Emily was breathing hard, tears of anger filling her eyes. "How could you? Mom's sick. She's dying. We have no money to pay for her treatment. And here you are, sitting in a fancy office as if nothing's wrong." Jacob, still seated, motioned to his assistant to leave and close the door. For a few seconds, he silently studied Emily. Now in her early 20s, she looked exhausted, worn out, but there was determination in her gaze. "I understand the situation is difficult," he said carefully. "But what do you want me to do?" She flushed. "You're her husband. At the very least, support me. At best, help Mom, no matter what she did. You're not a monster." A flicker of bitterness crossed Jacob's face. "Husband," he swallowed hard. "Emily, sit down. We need to talk." She stood there, gripping the strap of her bag, but finally complied, sinking into the leather chair opposite him. "All right," she hissed. "I'm listening." Jacob took some neatly folded papers from the top drawer. "This is a DNA test," he said, "which shows that he exhaled, that you're Daniel's daughter." Emily stiffened, disbelief and dread in her eyes. "That can't be true. That's impossible." He bowed his head. "I found out too late. It was hard to accept, but it's a fact, Emily. I'm not saying it's your fault. Of course not. You're just a victim of circumstances, of the lie we all failed to see." Tears welled up in her eyes. She jumped up. "So all this time you knew and just ran away? You left us." "I couldn't stay where I'd been betrayed in the worst possible way," he said quietly. "I had to at least save something of myself." Her shoulders slumped. "They told me you were selfish, that you abandoned Mom when she needed you. And now It hurts so much." Pain flashed in Jacob's eyes. "You're hurting? And what about me? I lost everything I thought was real. My wife, my family, you, the daughter I raised and loved. Only to find out that..." He broke off, unable to finish. A heavy silence fell. Emily sniffled. "But how can we live with this now? Mom isn't going to live long. She needs treatment. I don't know where to turn." He gripped his hands on the desk. "What about Daniel? He's your biological father." "Daniel's in prison," she said bitterly. "He got locked up for financial fraud. He doesn't have any money left." Jacob closed his eyes. He didn't want to admit that, despite the past, he couldn't simply turn away from the girl he'd raised as his daughter for 14 years. But returning to Alicia's life was out of the question. "Listen," he finally said, more softly. "I'll pay for the hospital. You can leave the bills with me. But that doesn't mean I'm going back to the past." Emily took a shuddering breath. "Okay. I'll take what you can give. But just so you know, Mom still loves you. And she shook her head as if at a loss for words. "I just never knew the truth." He nodded, trying to suppress a bitter smile. "The truth is rarely pleasant. Look, Emily, you can give your invoices to my secretary." She looked at him with a mixture of guilt, despair, and something else he couldn't decipher. Then she turned and left, closing the door quietly. The following months were critical for Alicia and Emily. The illness was advancing, and though Jacob had funded the basic treatment, it wasn't enough for the expensive experimental procedures. He still didn't want to pay for everything, feeling Alicia had caused her own demise. But the past wouldn't leave him alone. At some point, Jacob realized a deep anger still simmered inside him, anger at Alicia and Daniel, but also at himself. He had spent years consumed by vengeance, cutting himself off from compassion. He'd once compiled a thorough file on Daniel, handing it over to law enforcement and helping launch a huge fraud case. He knew he was destroying his brother, but hadn't been able to stop. The desire for retribution was stronger than any second thoughts. He'd humiliated Alicia publicly, exposing her affair in front of friends. Many turned against her. She lost her former clientele and eventually any chance to continue her career. Now this woman he had once loved so deeply was dying in poverty and obscurity. One evening, sitting on the balcony of his luxurious apartment, Jacob gazed at the city lights. He remembered himself years ago, sitting alone in the darkness of the home he once shared with Alicia, tormented by suspicion, wondering if his wife was faithful. How he'd then spiraled into jealousy and pain, finally fleeing to save himself. He had a new life now, success, comfort, but also a strange emptiness. That evening, for the first time in many years, he picked up the phone and dialed Emily's number. She answered after several rings. "Yes, Emily, it's me," he said quietly. How is Mom?" She was silent for a few seconds, then replied softly. "Not great. Doctors aren't giving much hope." His heart clenched, though he tried to remain calm. "I'm willing to pay for her treatment. Entirely. If there's anything else that might help. I can't promise a miracle, but we can try." A muffled sigh came through the phone. "Thank you. I don't know if it'll be enough, but I'll send you the bills." After that call, everything moved quickly. Using his money and connections at major medical centers, Jacob arranged for Alicia to be transferred to a specialized clinic. Surgeries and therapies gave her a small chance. For the first time in many years, Jacob stepped into the hospital ward where Alicia lay. She could barely speak, but when she saw him, she looked up, tears in her eyes. She had an four in one arm, and Emily was holding her other hand. "You still came," Alicia whispered with difficulty. He nodded, sensing an internal war between the anger of the past and an unexpected wave of regret. "Yes. I'm not sure why. Maybe I just need to finish everything." She closed her eyes as a single tear slid down her cheek. "You always were a good man." I'm to blame for everything. Everything I did was unforgivable." I'm sorry, Jacob." He looked at her silently. Emily stood behind her mother, watching her father's reaction with concern. "I don't know if I can forgive," he finally said slowly, "but I know I don't want to carry this hatred forever. It's already taken too much of my energy and time." The only sounds were the floor dripping and the nurse's paperwork rustling. Alicia opened her eyes again. "Tell me, why did you help? After all that?" He sighed heavily. "Maybe because I once loved you, and we had good moments. Even if a lot turned out to be a lie, I can't erase what was." She squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out. Emily leaned over, putting an arm around her shoulders. "Mom, you need rest." Jacob stood for another minute, then left the room, feeling both relief and sadness. He had done what he could, arranged for a good clinic, given Alicia a chance. Beyond that, it was in the doctor's and fate's hands. In the end, Alicia lived about 6 more months. Sometimes she improved, sometimes she deteriorated, but eventually the illness overcame her. In her final month, she was able to spend some meaningful time with Emily. They talked about the past and the future, trying to heal old wounds. Jacob visited her a few times. Near the end, Alicia asked him to come once more. When he walked into her room, she smiled faintly. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm still grateful for the life we had back then." Her breathing was shallow as she held Emily's hand with one of hers and extended the other to Jacob. He hesitated, then gently took her hand. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, silent, wordless. 20 years ago, it had begun with love, and now it was dying along with her. After Alicia's funeral, Emily approached Jacob by the grave and quietly asked, "What happens to me now? I know I'm not your biological daughter, but I don't have anyone else." He looked at her, recalling that little girl he once pushed on the swings at the park. Then he hugged her for the first time in many years. "Come on. We'll figure it out. We'll find a way to keep going." A few years later, life took on a new shape. Emily was in college and sometimes interned at Jacob's company during the summer. Daniel remained in prison, having no influence on either Emily's future or Jacob's life. Jacob himself slowly, step by step, accepted that his past, awful as it was behind him. The scars remained, of course, but they taught him something crucial: to value honesty, to face problems head-on, to trust only those who truly earned it, and, above all, not to let resentment grow into all-consuming revenge. He built a career, established a new life, and remarried a year ago to a woman named Linda, wise and caring, who'd had her own share of hardship. Now they lived outside the city in a spacious, bright house. In the mornings, they'd have breakfast on the terrace, listening to birdsong. One peaceful morning, he sat in a lounge chair, watching Linda chat with Emily about her plans to work at the company. The soft sounds of a summer garden floated through the air, and he felt a calm contentment deep down. He thought, I went through hell, but I managed to come back to the light. Jacob smiled at his own thoughts, sensing a slight twinge from the old scar in his heart, ghosts of memories. But he knew that now he was free from his past. He'd let go of the pain and anger, keeping only the lessons that made him stronger and more compassionate. When Emily came over with a smile to tell him she'd received an offer for a full internship at his IT firm, he replied without hesitation, That's wonderful. I'll be glad to have you on the team. Together, we can do anything. From then on, his life was no longer about endless conflicts and suspicion, about revenge or hatred toward former loved ones. He had chosen another path. Looking at the clear sky overhead, he felt a sense of profound peace. Life had shown him how devastating betrayal can be, how easily everything can be lost, and how difficult it is to regain trust. Yet in the end, he found the strength to love again and allow another person to be close to him. Despite all the wounds and scars inflicted by those once dearest to him, he retained his inner decency. Most important, he learned how to forgive. And so Jacob continued, developing his business, building a new family, and supporting Emily. No memories of Alicia or Daniel could ever steal his hard-earned happiness, because he knew you can mourn what's lost, but you can't keep fueling the pain forever. You have to move forward. He made that choice, and life responded in kind. That's the end of our story. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on new stories, and share this video so others can discover these great stories too.